Welcome to the Berkeley Hillside Club and our Fireside presentation. I'm Arlene Baxter, first Vice President of the club, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this long-standing series of informational presentations held on most first Mondays of the month. I'm here on Monday, October 5th, 2020, 122 years to the day from the first meeting of the founders of the club, when the north side of Berkeley looked like this photo. You are about to enjoy a presentation put together by our two historians. Daniella Thompson is well known in Berkeley for her extensive research and writings on local history for the Berkeley Architectural Heritage Association. She's also been instrumental in the successful landmarking of many historic properties within the city of Berkeley. David Mostardi is the Hillside Club historian and writes the monthly History Corner column, which appears in our newsletters. You can find past issues on the club's website, and I urge you to check back through past issues of the History Corner to learn more about the details of our club through the years. With that, I hope you will enjoy this presentation, and we'll see you again in about 25 minutes to answer any questions.
This is where it all began, not only for the Hillside Club, but also for the arts and crafts movement in Berkeley as we know it now. In 1891, a young man by the name of Charles Keeler was working in the Academy of Sciences in San Francisco and commuting by ferry. On the same ferry traveled Bernard Maybeck, then a young architect who worked in A. Page Brown's office in San Francisco. And so they ran into each other on the ferry numerous times without talking. Keeler thought that Maybeck was a European, possibly Italian, until he found out otherwise, because one day Maybeck approached him and told him that he heard that Keeler had purchased a lot north of the university in Berkeley. And Keeler was surprised because he never told that to anyone. And Maybeck said, if you ever get ready to build, I would like to design you a house. And Keeler said, well, I only intended this as an investment. I wasn't going to build. Nevertheless, 2 years later, Keeler got married. And then suddenly he was interested in building a house. And so he went to visit Maybeck. Maybeck was building his own house then. It was all handmade, built by his architecture students at the university. And it looked completely unfinished on the inside. And the Keelers took Maybeck up on his word and asked him to design them a house. We are standing in front of that house right now. We are on Highland Place near Ridge Road. This is the Charles Keeler house. Next to it to the north is the Charles Keeler studio, also designed by Maybeck. This house was built in 1895. It was revolutionary for its time. It was clad in shingles. Very, very few buildings in Berkeley had shingles on their exterior at that time. Shingles arrived in Berkeley only in 1892. And this house was shaped like a cross with a series of highly pitched roofs cascading down the hill. The whole idea with this house was to blend it into the landscape, the hilly landscape behind. Now it's covered with large apartment buildings. And on the inside, it was all redwood, unpainted. The living room looked like a chapel. And Keeler was delighted with it, but he said to Maybeck, but what am I going to do when everybody comes and builds these stupid white painted boxes around me? The effect would be ruined. And Mabeck said, you must see to it that all your neighbors build houses that are in fitting with your own. And with that statement, the kernel of the Hillside Club was born.
There were three people crucial to the founding of the Hillside Club and its subsequent successes, and we've met two of them here at this house. When Charles Keeler met Bernard Mabeck on the ferry in 1891, it started an architectural story arc that culminated in 1904 with the publication of Keeler's book, The Simple Home, which became the Hillside Club's manifesto for Berkeley home building. It was also, not coincidentally, written and published during Charles Keeler's 2-year stint as president of the Hillside Club. Now, as Daniella said, when Mabeck told Keeler that he must see to it that other houses in the neighborhood are in keeping with his own, Keeler took that message to heart, and very quickly. Keeler was a very gregarious person. We might even call him an evangelist. And by 1900, there were 5 other buildings in this area, very much like his own, all constructed by Bernard Mabeck. We'll meet the third person, crucial to the founding of the Hillside Club, at our next stop, Veldvreden.
Keeler tells that while he was talking to neighbors about building houses in keeping with his own, he got a visit from an Oakland banker by the name of Moody, who came by with his son-in-law, and they had already selected A.C. Schweinfurt to build them a house further down the hill. And this is the house. It no longer looks the way it did in those days, because in the 1950s, it got 2 new stories above. Originally, it had a Dutch gable, a stepped Dutch gable, facing Leroy Avenue. It was completely covered in clinker brick, which was highly unusual and in fact revolutionary for that time, because clinker brick were refuse bricks that were used only for chimneys. Here we have to point out that the whole idea that led to the Hillside Club was the ethos of living with nature, and so the siting of the house was extremely important. It stands on the bank of the North Fork of Strawberry Canyon with an impressive clinker brick bridge leading over the creek to the house itself. The site originally was full of old ancient oak trees that are now mostly gone, unfortunately. It was surrounded by gardens. Now, the banker Moody was a friend of Phoebe Apperson Hearst, and her favorite architect in those days was A.C. Schweinfurt. And so we suspect that the reason that Moody picked Schweinfurt and not Mabeck to design this house was through the recommendation of Phoebe Apperson Hearst. Schweinfurt died very young. He was still in his 30s, and in Berkeley he completed only 2 houses, rather 2 buildings. This was one of them, Veldvreden, in 1896, and then 2 years later, through the influence of the son-in-law of Moody, Edmund Gray, who was a big cheese in the Unitarian Church, he got to design the first Unitarian Church, another revolutionary building.
The Hillside Club did not just materialize out of thin air. There were many different social forces at work. The first was the energy of the young University of California, just 2 blocks away. In the 1890s, almost everybody who lived on North Side was directly connected with the university. There was the new architectural style that we saw at the Keeler House. the California expression of the arts and crafts movement. As Daniella touched upon, there was the new environmental movement, although it wasn't called that at the time. Many of the movers and shakers in Berkeley were also movers and shakers in the new Sierra Club, founded in 1892. They believed in getting lots of fresh air, sleeping outside, and even going jogging. There were new ideas about what a hillside should look like. They were trying to avoid what had happened in San Francisco, where a rectilineal street grid was simply laid down on the landscape willy-nilly. Here the idea was for the streets to follow the contours of the hillside. If there was a big rock in the way, there are many rhyolite outcrops in Berkeley. If there was a rock in the way, you went around the rock. If there was a grand oak tree in the way, you went around the oak tree and you built your house in between the tree and the rock. Here at Veldvreden, I'm standing under magnificent redwood trees, which were magnificent oak trees at the time. So in the late 1890s, there was this froth of new ideas. And it's here at Veldvreden that we meet the third of the important people involved in the founding of the Hillside Club, Margaret Robinson, Madge to her friends. So Madge was also invested in this froth of new ideas, and she was very well connected in Berkeley's social circles. She knew Maybeck and Keeler, of course. Madge was the sort of woman who knew everybody that was worth knowing. And so it was here at Veldvreden that Madge and her sister May gathered together 30 of their influential women friends, and on Wednesday, the 5th of October, 1898, the very first meeting of the Hillside Club was held here. Further meetings of the Hillside Club were held both here and at the homes of Hillside Club members until 1901, when the Hillside School was built. This was a very famous house in its day, and one of the reasons it was so famous is because it appeared on a number of picture postcards. Pictures were taken from the street, which featured not only the Cape Dutch brick outline of the upper story, but this wonderful bridge over the creek.
The Moody family of Veldvreden were Unitarians, and it was the Unitarian connection that caused this house, Allen Oak, to be built here, because Alan Freeman and his wife Jessie were also Unitarians, and they followed their Unitarian brethren to the north side and built in a similar style, also using clinker bricks, except they hired Coxhead and Coxhead to do the design. So Ernest Coxhead designed here a very unique building with gigantic dormers that have a Dutch colonial look, totally out of proportion to anything we expect to see on a conventional house. Also a very large entrance portico that is very interesting, and I hope that Arlene can catch it in her lens. And as I said, the name of the place is Allen Oak. Alan Freeman was in the fruit business, and he had an orchard called Allen Oak somewhere near Sacramento. As for the Coxheads, Almeric Coxhead, who was the business partner in Coxhead and Coxhead, was a Hillside Club member. And he also lived for a while in Cloyne Court, which is to our left, a large shingled structure designed by John Galen Howard, yet another member of the Hillside Club. The north side in those days was a small, tight-knit community in fairly rural settings. We're now standing across the street from Veldvreden, also known as the Moody House, where the co-founders of the Hillside Club lived. As David mentioned, those were Madge Robinson and her sister May Gray, who were the adult stepdaughters of Volney Moody. Madge Robinson was a great advocate for building with nature and for building on the hillside. And in fact, she published about this even before The Simple Home came out in 1904. She wrote an article for House Beautiful in 1902, talking about the problem of hillside building. Madge married the fine arts photographer Oscar Maurer, and he came and lived at Weltevreden with the rest of the family. He had a studio in San Francisco that was burnt out in the big 1906 earthquake and fire. And so at that point, he commissioned Bernard Maybeck to build him a studio directly across the street from Weltevreden. And this is what we're looking at now. The Oscar Maurer studio, 1907, the same year that Maybeck designed the Lawson House. And although until now he built mostly shingled houses, for the first time he was using concrete or cement plaster as the cladding, probably as a result of the San Francisco fire of 1906. This building is a City of Berkeley landmark, as is Weltevreden and as is Allen Oak that we have just visited, and of course also the Keeler House and Studio up the hill. In addition to living with nature and building with nature, the members of the Hillside Club also believed in civic engagement. And one of the first acts that they were involved in after founding the club was to talk the city into building a public school in this neighborhood. And the school was approved and designed and built in 1900 and opened in 1901. And it used to be right here where I'm standing now, on the corner of Leroy and Virginia. The school burnt down in the 1923 fire. So what we are seeing around us now are the Cielito Vista apartments designed by Clarence Casebolt Dakin in 1930. The school itself was built of redwood, unpainted on the inside, shingled on the outside. The porch posts were unpeeled tree trunks, and inside there were lots of pictures of nature scenes. So the school was really designed to be part of the living with nature ethos of the Hillside Club. Fresh from the success they've had with the Hillside School, the ladies of the Hillside Club came to Charles Keeler to ask his advice about what to do next. And he suggested that they invite men to join the club for greater effectiveness. And so in 1902, men joined the club, and a year later, they got involved with improving the neighborhood as a whole, not just their homes. They formed a committee to design a system of artistic grades, stairs, elevated sidewalks, and retaining walls that was built in 1909 by the City of Berkeley. And that is a landmark now called the Hillside Club Street Improvements in the Daley Scenic Park tract. Members of that design committee included Bernard Maybeck, of course, and also Arthur Bolton, who lived right across the street and about whom you will hear from David.
As Daniella said, in 1902, the Hillside Club reorganized into a formal club, including officers and meeting minutes and charter memberships and a bank account, and not insignificantly, men. California didn't vote for women's suffrage until 1911, and of course the United States not until 1920. And while Madge Robinson and her friends may have been very influential, they couldn't vote. And so having men as part of the club was going to make it much easier on a political scale to be able to accomplish the club's goals. There was also the feeling that, even back in 1902, that the club needed a clubhouse, a place to call their own. Now, there was never going to be any question who the architect for the clubhouse was. Of course, the club was going to hire Bernard Maybeck to do that. And lastly, any organization, political or otherwise, as it matures, feels the need to have social events. The people want to have a dinner or a dance or a picnic. And when you have a dinner or a dance or picnic, you're going to want men and women. All these things contributed to the club's reorganization in 1902 as a club for both men and women. One of the Hillside Club members on the committee to design the Hillside Club street improvements that we just saw was Arthur Bolton, who lived in this gorgeous house on La Loma with this beautiful front door and these barn shingles. Today we think about some club members living nearby and others far away, but 100 years ago, the club was a true neighborhood organization. Everybody in the club lived nearby and could walk to the club. In the early days, you had to bring your lantern along so that you could see your way home in the dark after the meeting was over. As we're located just 2 blocks north of the university, almost everybody who was in the club worked for the university, either as a professor or in administration. This gave rise to the very high quality of lectures at the Hillside Club, which were almost all given by members who were professors or administrators or administrators of the city of Berkeley.
Wanted to thank Daniella and David for their expertise. Obviously really shows a great amount of time went into this. Daniella had a tremendous amount of background information that she worked on over the years. And then David spent quite a bit of time editing this into the final format that you got to see. Then we are getting to see it tonight on the 122nd anniversary of the first meeting of the club. So just seems really, really fitting. So happy birthday again to us. And with that, I'm going to say, let's use the convention that has become so popular with Zoom. If you want to raise your hands and ask a question, please use the raise hand feature You could also put things in the chat if you don't want to ask them directly, but I'll be looking for people who raise their hands. That should be under participants. You should be able to find a raise hand feature. And if I don't see you, then just do the old-fashioned wave at me if your video camera's on, and let's take questions either for David or Daniella.
Yes. Is it true this is part one of a new 10-part series?
But
It was beautifully well done. It really was.
thank you. Yeah. So if you're writing the check, Rick, then yeah.
Actually, there are lots of articles about Northside landmarks. David, I thought you were going to include a link.
You're right. I did too. There was a lot of things I was working on. I forgot to put those in. Sorry about that.
We can send that out though.
Okay, it's on the Baja website.
Yeah.
And they're all collected there together. So there's a lot of history.
I can make a version 2.
We
that
can
includes
make a
that.
version 2 because we're going to want to put a version on the Hillside Club YouTube channel. So we can do that. We can add another slide in, and then that won't have, you know, any of the bobbles from starting and stopping. So I think
I
that's
think we
great.
have 3 questions. Goes Barbara, Jan, and Christine.
And also Nancy.
Oh, and Nancy. Okay.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. I was curious about the brown shingle houses that were surrounding the area that I guess Maybach must have designed, but they like they were half a dozen or more. Did they all burn in the 23 fire?
No, none of them burned.
What?
They were torn down.
They were torn down.
in the 60s and replaced by apartment buildings.
Okay.
So
All right.
the Keeler house is the only one left.
Right. Okay. I was just curious about that.
And the
So
studio.
that was pretty devastating, that fire, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What is the address of the Keeler house?
1772
Highland Place.
Highland Place.
Thank you.
I think
That's
Jan.
1772, 1774 is currently a duplex.
It's a triplex.
Triplex, actually. Yeah, triplex. You're right.
Now, you noticed from the old pictures that it used to be shingled, of course, but after the 1923 fire, it got stuccoed. But the studio is still shingled.
So let's see. Christine, I think, had a question.
I think
Yeah,
Jan, and then, well, go ahead, Christine, and then Jan.
how quickly did, you know, from the first brown shingle to sort of what we think of Berkeley now, how long did it take to sort of fill in most of what we know as Berkeley, North Berkeley?
Well, by the time the 1923 fire occurred, it was fully built.
Ah.
So that picture at the end of Daley's Park from the hill looking down towards the bay, you saw that was mostly empty. As Daniella said, that was completely filled in by 1923 when the fire came in. I mean, one of the big things that caused Berkeley to be built up really quickly in the early part of the century was the 1906 earthquake and fire. And there were lots of refugees who decided that, because San Francisco had lots of fires before that. The 06 was not the first fire. And a lot of people just got tired of all those fires. And so they moved to the East Bay and built over here. And so if you take a look at the population between 1900 and 1920, it rises quite a bit.
And with a huge building boom from 1910 to 1915. That was
From 1907, in fact, yeah.
Jan had a question.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a wonderful video. And I hope that you will, I really do hope it will be available on YouTube for everybody that wants to see it. And also, I would love sort of a walking map of the houses from that video that are close by Virginia and Leroy.
Well, there's something
Where we all are.
There's something much more extensive than that. In the Baja book, 41 Walking Tours, there are 2 Northside tours that I put together.
Oh, good.
Each one has a map and quite a few addresses and a blurb on each one.
Oh, great.
So it's not just what we saw today, but a lot more.
So when's, you need to do a book out of this video too. But it was just fabulous. And I hope I can get some other people to see it too.
Those 2 walking tours are fabulous.
Oh, that's good.
Right.
I need to.
Baja has a wealth of them.
Yeah, I need to
Yes,
make.
I have a few of those booklets.
I need to make a correction.
Oh, yes.
When I was talking about Madge Robinson and her article in House Beautiful, it wasn't published in 1902. It was published in 1899. So that was actually 5 years before Charles Keeler's The Simple Home.
Wow.
So
As I said to Daniella, we can forgive her because in fact, Madge Robinson contributed to articles in.
oh, she wrote an article every year. So that she did actually publish one in 1902. It just wasn't this one.
She was prolific. And such a wonderful figure. I mean, there was that one picture of her with hats, but there are many others. She was really quite a dramatic,
She was-
charismatic figure.
Yeah, she was a clothes horse. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, I have one other question. Was the first house that you showed always that barn red color, or was it originally another color?
That was shingles.
It had brown shingles originally.
Brown shingle. Okay, I thought I saw sort of a barn red color.
Very, very different.
You did. It was stucco
It's
afterwards.
kind of
Oh,
orange,
got it. Okay.
but that's paint. That's
Okay. Yeah. I understand. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
and not really barn red. It's kind of orange.
Orange. Yeah.
Orangey,
Well,
yeah.
I was trying to be.
Light, yes.
Yeah.
Nancy Parker?
2 questions. One, what was the cause of the 1923 fire? And the second question is about the growth of Berkeley. I'm assuming that most of the growth started near the city center, moved north into the hills, and then further across. I'm curious as to how the growth continued all the way to the El Cerrito line.
Okay, let's take it a step at a time. Let's start with the architecture. Berkeley originally had 2 centers, 2 separate towns. One of them was West Berkeley, that was called Ocean View. And the other one was East Berkeley, which was around Shattuck Avenue and a little north. And when they brought the trains to town in 1876, that made the town grow a little, the East Berkeley, further north. And later on, when electric trains, commuter trains came, that caused the expansion in every direction. And all the empty areas that used to be, agricultural plots and fields were subdivided and built up. So there was a tract in North Berkeley that's older than ours. It's called Anticel's Villa Lots, and that's around Vine Street, east of Shattuck, going up to Arch Street. That got started in 1874. Daley Scenic Park is the earliest one in the hills, however, north of the university. And then beyond that, there was just an expansion wherever the streetcars went. That's where buildings were being built. So, and then eventually, of course, it grew enough that the 2 towns merged. I mean, because Berkeley incorporated in 1878 as both, Berkeley and Ocean View. And that's how they became one city. And they had, the original city hall was somewhere in the center between the 2. And it was only in 1909 that it was built in what is now Civic Center, where it is now. Now, what was your other question?
Maybe David can answer the question about the fire.
Right. I think the day of the 1923 fire, was a day just, if you were here for the Oakland firestorm, it was very much a day like that. It was a very hot day, very windy, and the wind coming from the east. So the hot winds from the Central Valley. Daniella can correct me. I'm not sure there was a known cause. They know about where the fire started. The area north of sort of the Nut Hill area, what we call Nut Hill now, was very sparsely built up. It was mostly open grassland. As I understand it, that's where the fire started. But because it was so windy, it blew right down the hill, and the entire fire happened on that one day, and just about 6 hours. 400 some houses were burned down in just those 6 hours, and then it was all over.
About 50 of Maybach's, many Julia Morgan's. Yeah.
And there were 91, so there were 91 people in the Hillside Club who lost their home, and it was
including Bernard Maybach.
Well, yes, including Bernard Maybach himself. And the next meeting, what would have been a fireside in October, was held at the Town and Gown Club because the Hillside Club clubhouse had also burned. And everyone who had lost their homes were the guests of all the members who had not. It was very heartwarming. And the clubhouse we're in now was ready for occupancy by August. So within a year, it was up and ready to go. Daniella, maybe you can add something if I missed out.
About the fire or the clubhouse?
About the fire.
No, it started northeast of where Berryman Reservoir is, and it was just a wildfire, and the wind really whipped it up. And what happened in the afternoon is the wind changed direction, and that pretty much put a stop to it. So it just reached the edge of downtown.
And just like today, where there are people who ignore evacuation orders and stand up on their roofs and try and rinse them down, that's what happened in 1923, and it worked. In some places, there are little pockets, if you look at the map, which burned, little pockets which did not burn, and some of those were due to students, because a lot of students lived in Northside who had gotten up on the roofs of their houses and were trying to save them.
All right, so we have take a question from Rains Cohen, followed by Benet, and then John Hollis.
Yeah. Hi, it's actually from Betsy. Rains is right across from me, though. Great video. Really, it's so interesting to learn about all the architectural and natural building. And so I got to play, I just want two comments and then my question. I got to play Marge Robinson for that play that we had at the Hillside Club, probably 10 years ago at least. And I got to wear a fabulous hat from my own great grandmother's. It was a lot of fun. So first, the house that you were standing in front of, that was the large Vanderveld house or something. Velten Vreden. Isn't that a Berkeley student co-op now?
No, it's the Cal Band House.
Oh, okay, thank you. I thought I'd been in it as a co-op, but
they call it Tellefson Hall.
Great, Tellefson. All right, thank you.
There's a saxophone across the top.
That's
and
great.
as we were there filming, there were people who were bringing various musical instruments in and out.
Okay.
There was one fellow who had one of those huge anvil cases that had a tuba inside, and he's dragging this thing over flagstones. Very fun. Very amusing.
And my final question is a little more serious. I've been looking at, the racial segregation and the redlining, the restrictive covenants in Berkeley, and see a lot about the ones, Claremont area, LeConte neighborhood. I mean, definitely all over. But I'm wondering if the Unitarians managed to build a beautiful neighborhood without restrictive covenants racially, or did they enforce other kinds of covenants as well? So racial covenants and other restrictive, like you must.
Well, we can't really speak about the Unitarians, but we can speak about the north side, Daley Scenic Park. There were no restrictive covenants. And in fact, there is a Victorian house on Ridge Road, just west of Allen Oak, where the head of household in the late 19th century was a Black woman. And then also there was a Black student living on LeConte Avenue, which is, just two doors up from my house. So it doesn't look that way, no.
Certainly not enough.
So, I'm looking at Benet, then John Hollis, and then Margot.
Yeah, this is Alec. I have the question. Going back to I guess it's the turn of the century and maybe through 20, how were the parcels, how were, first of all, the roads laid out, arterials and then the residentials, and how were parcels decided on, like parcel size? I know we live on Hill Court, which I believe was laid out by donation of the road to the city, and then some understanding that it would be broken up into relatively smaller parcels. I wonder what was the philosophy or even the legal framework within which parcel sizes were decided.
There was just a tract that was subdivided and mapped and submitted to Alameda County, and the lots were drawn on it in advance before they were sold. For every tract, there is a map like that.
So it was the developer that decided sort of how big to make them to maximize.
He wasn't really a developer. His name was Wilson, Frank M. Wilson, and his house was on top of what we know now as Holy Hill, where the GTU library is. That's where his house stood, and it was a brown shingle built in 1894. And he just sold land to people who wanted to build. He did not develop anything. He was very well connected, and he brought Benjamin Ide Wheeler and Phoebe Appleson Hearst to live in the neighborhood, and he actually built their houses for them. As for the streets, how they were laid out, I think a lot had to do with the residents. The hillside street improvements, that's part of it, but they had to work with the city. The city engineer had to be involved in deciding and in laying out how things were. But they obviously did not want to have a grid system of streets in their neighborhood. And because it was sparsely developed at that time, they were able to do that. So
one of the things that we unfortunately didn't get into the filming, but David mentioned how if there was a rock or a tree in the street, you went around the rock or a tree. And one of the famous trees we were right near, which was Annie's Oak. And that's now a landmark. That's the second oak. And as we were looking at it, there may soon be a third oak. But that was a good example of where the streets curved as opposed to being on a grid. And that was something that both here and in Thousand Oaks was a very characteristic part of those developments. And I do think, Mason McDuffie, who did the development of several major other Berkeley developments, was keeping with that premise of maintaining the natural outcroppings and attributes of the Berkeley setting. So John Hollis, and then Margot.
First off, Arlene, Daniela, and David, thanks. This is really cool. This sparks a whole lot of interesting questions. Mine seem to all come around the actual craftspeople who built the houses. Is there anything historically known, written, otherwise, about the people who actually did, you know, the sawing and the milling and the hammering and you know, the glaziers and the masons and et cetera? One of the things that you talked about was the big boom in building right after the San Francisco fire. Where did the craftspeople come from? Was there a pool of people in the East Bay already?
Yes.
It seems like they'd be really in demand. Why
Yes.
did they build the Hillside Club instead of other houses? Which, you know, who got priority, that sort of thing. I'd be really interested in kind of the backstory on the actual craftspeople.
Okay, you're now talking about two different cataclysms. One of them is the huge building boom of the late 1900, I mean, the first decade of the 20th century after the San Francisco earthquake and fire. I mean, that was a huge one where the population tripled in less than 10 years. And then, of course, there was another building boom after the 1923 fire, but that one was focused on the north side that got burned, whereas after the 1906 fire, all of Berkeley was growing. You see, this is a much smaller area we're talking about. And yes, there were plenty of local carpenters, builders, craftspeople, not just in Berkeley, but in Oakland and all around.
We do know a little bit about some of the more famous craftspeople, but only for the more famous architects. So for example, the Thorson House that was built by Green and Green, the only Green and Green here in the East Bay, we know something about those carpenters, but it was because of their association with Green and Green. Julia Morgan also was able to get, say, stonemasons from Italy, but that was only, I assume, only the case when they were building homes with fairly prominent architects and with clients who were willing to pay for that kind of craftsmanship. Daniela, do we know much about any other individuals on
Well, there are lots of them because, you know, Baja has a database of building permits, and the builders are always listed there. So we know who they are, and some of them were very, very prolific, and they changed over the years, of course. Right.
That would be the listed builders would be the architects and the builders, the equivalent of a contractor today, I'm guessing.
Well, builders, contractors, those are interchangeable. That's what I'm talking about. But many of them called themselves carpenters. So they very often didn't just lord it over the others, but were, you know, materially involved in doing the building.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
All right. Let's see, Margot and then Jan again, I think. Margot, do you want to unmute yourself?
During the gold rush, when everybody came to mine gold and they abandoned the ships in the harbor, that among them were ship's carpenters, and that they moved into and were doing a lot of the kind of carpentry they did aboard ship, which is why we have the built-in cabinets in the dining rooms and things like that. Maybe that's just a myth, but that's what I heard.
It's a myth.
Okay. And the other thing is that when I bought my house up in the Berkeley Hills, where I raised my children up on the corner of Marin and San Benito, in the deed in 1969, there was a clause that said I could not sell to people of color or Jews, and I couldn't sell a liquor out of the house. It was in the deed.
There's a whole history with Berkeley and liquor.
Yes.
The host stopped it.
But I also couldn't sell to people of color. It was in the deed.
Right. That's one of those restrictive covenants that we were talking about.
Yeah.
They may have appeared later than the 1890s. They appeared in the 30s, I think, when.
No, they were already there in 1905.
In North Berkeley?
Well, no, I'm talking about the Elmwood and.
Yeah.
Well, and too, because Mason McDuffie unfortunately was quite fond of those covenants. That was part of his marketing, in fact.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So let's see.
Well, I never sold liquor out of there.
Well, they also didn't want, they sold those tracts by saying no commercial businesses, this is purely residential, park-like settings. And so shops had to be restricted to commercial blocks away from the houses.
Well, I wondered if it had anything to do with prohibition.
This was much earlier than prohibition.
Oh.
Barbara Sue had a question. Barbara Sue? Oh, you're still muted. You want to unmute yourself? Just hit the space bar, works too.
No, I miss Berkeley and its beautiful architecture, but I'm in Princeton cleaning closets. And actually, I was just waving to my husband who was in Berkeley.
Okay.
I see. All righty. Let's see. Anyone else has a question? If you just at this point want to go ahead and ask it. Barbara Rydlander.
Yeah, I was curious. You just raised an interesting issue, Margot. And I've noticed that there was a fairly substantial population of Jewish people who lived around Vine and Rose. Was that established early on in the century, or did that come later? Because I know there's a big congregation there, but I was curious about whether there was a cluster of people in a neighborhood.
Well, I don't know about that neighborhood, but I can tell you that there were Jews in Berkeley in the 1870s.
Really?
The Fischel family, the butchers of downtown Berkeley, they were Jewish. So, yeah.
I think Susan McKenzie's had her hand up too for what when Barbara's
Susan, go ahead.
Yeah, I put it in. A fabulous job on the video. It's just really aesthetic, so informative. Kudos to everybody involved. Thank you so much. Beautiful presentations on the video too, each of you. And I love the music. So I had two trivia questions. One was that from the vantage point on the historical photo from Daley Park down to Euclid, that's the straightest line, if I saw it correctly, for Euclid, right to left. Is that right? Horizontal, it looked like a straight line.
It is straight.
That part of Euclid, is straight.
What part of Euclid? I guess that's on the north side up from Hearst. Is that right?
Between Hearst and Cedar.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That photograph goes from Hearst on the left to Virginia. We're more or less looking straight down Virginia on the right side.
Oh, beautiful.
We can't see Hillgard and we cannot see Cedar in that photograph. If we could, I would have pointed out where the current clubhouse site is, but so that from that vantage point, it's looking west and a little south.
Yeah, got it. Oh, great. Okay, so it covered a shorter span than I was thinking of at the time. It looked so barren and empty. And then secondly, going up Shasta, there's a set of 3 little enclave houses that we toured one of when it was on the market. And they were built, I think, in the 20s, about from the Jungian Society or something had them. And you have to go up a footpath and you can't park and all this stuff. Do you know the history on that?
No, that's not Daley Scenic Park. Sorry.
That's much further up. Yeah, one of them was not too long ago on the market. I actually had interviewed for that gig. But they have changed so much now. yeah, I'm not sure what more I could contribute.
Thanks. I just wondered if they were Mabec. They look sort of like that inside, but they were the chalet stucco outside with the balconies and.
There are no Maybachs on that street at all.
No, they're not Maybachs, and unfortunately, one of the sellers wanted desperately for it to be one. And I wasn't willing to further that delusion, so.
Good for you, thank you.
So we didn't see any Julia Morgans.
No, we have one Julia Morgan in the neighborhood, but the owners of that house were not members of the Hillside Club, so we didn't include it.
We were really focusing this on the foundation of the club and its influence on this area and vice versa. So
maybe we have an annual sequel then.
Yeah.
Now that we kind of know how to do it, now I know where the proper mic switches are. So.
Also, we've seen, I mean, in the video, we saw the first 3 meeting places. Right. Well, the first 2 meeting places. I mean, Braden, where the first meeting was, and the old Hillside School, which burned down, which is where the meetings were after that. And the meetings were held at the school until 1906, when the old clubhouse was built, the one that was here, and which burned down in 1923, and then this building. So we were focusing mostly on the development of the club itself.
Arlene, Lorinda had her hand up twice now.
Oh, my apologies, go right ahead.
Thank you. I had to join the meeting late because of another meeting, and so I was wondering if a video would be available, but I see
it will be.
It will be up on the Facebook page?
Well, we'll put it on our YouTube channel. Yeah, we actually, Hillside Club has a YouTube channel, so.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
We'll definitely put it there, yeah.
Alert.
And we will add, thanks Danielle for reminding us, we'll add a couple more slides with some reference material too.
So you'll let us know when that will be posted?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Glad you could join us, albeit late. And one more question.
Christine has the hand up.
So did the original Hillside Club have like hitching posts in front of the building? Were people still using horses and stuff?
I don't think, well,
if they all lived here, they were walking, right?
They walked there. They lived in the neighborhood. They didn't need horses.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people may have had horses for longer journeys, or needs to go down into town. It was a little while before the streetcars made their way up to the neighborhood. Houses were beginning to be built with electricity at that time, in the very late 1800s. I mean, you read statistics about how in the year 1900 only some low percentage of American houses had bathtubs or something like that. I mean, it was a time of great change, and the great change was happening very quickly.
Richard Schwartz, got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add my name to complimenting how it was a great presentation and
well,
very
for coming
informative.
from you, we really appreciate that. Thank you, Richard.
And oh, you betcha. And a couple things. One, most people think there were a lot of horses owned by individuals at their houses, and the reason this was generally not true is if you had a horse, it had to be kept very close to your house. And what that meant was, for the people who did have them, is the mother and the daughters for 20 or 30 minutes before dinner had to shoo all the flies out of the house every day, because the horse poop would attract flies. And it was a lot more complicated than us looking back could ever imagine. So the people who had horses were people like realtors, because they had to bring people to see lots to buy. And if you wanted to go somewhere before the streetcars, there were people in the town called expressmen, like John E. Boyd, the boss baggage buster of beautiful Berkeley. And he would take you and your furniture or your baggage to wherever you needed to go. And the other thing I wanted to say was, that was an amazing 1898 photo from up on the hill looking down. And one of the things that's striking about it is this beautiful, beautiful flat area with oaks and with the North Fork of Strawberry Creek right adjacent to it. And the reality of this is to take a few steps backwards. This area, Daley Scenic Park, was well occupied by Native Americans. And I'm not at liberty to give the specifics, but it wasn't just on campus. And so keep your eyes open when you're out and about enjoying the architecture. And if anybody bumps into something or trips over something or sees something, let me know.
Good point. Okay, I have something to add about horses, or rather lack thereof. Fact is, people had cars. In the first decade of the 20th century, they had cars. And there is a very nice picture of the Moody family with Oscar Maurer driving a car. And they're right in front of Allen Oak, and they're off to the big game, which at that time was rugby rather than football. So, that's it. People had, at least the people who lived around here.
Well, I think well-to-do people had cars.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I think it was mostly well-to-do people who initially built around here.
Yes, I
true.
agree. I agree.
That's true enough. I think that's probably a good place to end. I'm going to invite Jan to mention our next Hillside Club event, which is in 2 weeks from tonight. So this is our second member spotlight. So we're not a big distinction between the firesides and spotlights, but there may be some. But this is, something that one of you is really interested in and involved with and would like to make a presentation, maybe something like a half hour, 20 minutes. Doesn't have to be terribly formally presented, but I know Jan is been working hard and with Jim, and it will be a formal presentation. So Jan, why don't you just tell us briefly what you're going to be showing in 2 weeks from tonight?
I'm going to be presenting on the mosaics of St. Mark's Church. We have a set of mosaics. Jim, can you help me out here and fill in here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's there an artist, Ruth Cravath, who was
Ruth Cravath. I couldn't think of her first name.
A contemporary of sculptors like Stackpole, Ralph Stackpole, and Benny Buffano, and some others around in the 20s and 30s in San Francisco. Also did other, as many artists, not just, well, mainly a sculptor. She also had was a painter at times. She taught at the California's School of Fine Arts, is it there? The California school where Stackpole, had taught as well. And in 1961, the St. Mark's brought her in to create this series of mosaics, which some of these images, there's one particularly of they're kind of iconic and meant to be read allegorically sometimes, and it's beautiful. It's and they were preserved in a recent restoration. They had been installed in Williams Hall, which was the education building of St. Mark's. And due to earthquake safety and other reasons, they had to do a fairly major redevelopment in 2012. And those mosaics were put in storage and then brought back in 2014 to this new Lions Hall. And consequently, many of the parishioners Jan included, were involved in documenting the and taking some really fabulous photos of the mosaics. And it's a chance to learn not just about the mosaics, but about Ruth Cravath, this wonderful wonderful sculptor we don't often hear about. She also did the St. Francis. Her most notable public work of art is probably the St. Francis that used to be at Candlestick. It's like a 27-foot statue that was, and that's in storage now too. We don't know where that's going to end up. But also to learn about her, and frankly, you know, some of the architectural history that we're learning about St. Mark's comes from an old colleague and club member of Berkeley Architectural Heritage Association, Susan Cerny, which I'm sure, you know, and Daniella can fill me in on blanks when there's about this history. But you know, she wrote a little bit about St. Mark's as well, and we'll have a slide or two about that.
Great. Well, we'll very much look forward to that in 2 weeks. And then a month from today, we'll have another fireside meeting. It will be the night right before the election. So I'm putting together something that we hope will be uplifting, not maybe so informative, just hopeful and a little bit of distraction. So, and if any of you have suggestions, if you think, gosh, you know, I've been working on this project or this person or this topic that I'd love to share, we'd love to hear from you. And whether it's a spotlight or if you know someone in the larger community, not a club member, but maybe would like to become one, just let us know and we can see, you know, what format would fit best. But we're always on the lookout for how we can have more social engagement and engagement within our community. If there are other community organizations that you're part of and it would be good to partner with, especially for a fireside. I've partnered with Baja, with the Friends of the Fountain and Walk. We love to do that. So just think about, you know, if there's something that you think we would be interested in, let either me or Jim know, and we'd look forward to including those. So I think with that, Jim, anything else before we say goodnight?
No, but thank you. I'll just add my final thank you to all three of you for a wonderful presentation. I've jogged past there and wanted to know and it's brought it all together for me. So
it was a pleasure. It was fun to do. So
thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you all.
Thank you. It was great.
Stay safe. Stay well.
See you soon.
Good night.